know it's another weekend out of a busy annual calendar. I wanted to just start by saying a thank you to a couple of people in the room. Last year I became chair of the officials committee, but there's two people that have done a significant amount of work with those committees over the past few years, and I just want to put it on record and thank them in front of the cohort they work with, officials. So Joyce has been chair of that committee for, I'm not sure how many years, Joyce, but quite a few years, and done a lot of work to develop officials. And Lynette has been on the committee working on the mentoring scheme. So hopefully you can join me in a round of applause to say thank you. I'm going to do a bit of a pitch for the officials committee. It is there to help develop the sport, to get the message from you guys who have all the experience up through the system, to support Welsh Athletics in delivering either the current strategy or the reviewed strategy after they had discussions. And we have a couple of vacancies for a couple of the regions. So we need people from the north, and I think we need a representative from the west. We have discipline-specific leads on that committee. But if you want to have your say either coming on the committee, or if you just have some opinions you want to give, just either go to your regions and feed it in, or contact me direct. Because we want to make it a sport that you feel part of, you're contributing to make it better, and hopefully giving a more positive experience for everyone else involved in the sport. So that's my little pitch at the start. But what we're here to talk about, and this has come out of the work of the committee, is when people come on a course, they go on a course, they do their level 1 or assistant course, and then they go out and are thrown into the wilderness to start officiating, and then unless you progress all the way up to level 4, you don't have another formal learning opportunity. It is on-the-job learning. So what we've put together today is just from the brains in the room, some of the thoughts and experiences some of the higher level officials have had, thinking, are there things that would help you on that journey that might not be in a rule book? They might have been on the course when you originally came along, but your mind was probably boggled at the end of those 2 or 4 hours. So some of those top tips that might help you on that journey, officiating journey, and then also just to set it in a bigger context, because you might have been on a course about field or track or timekeeping, but there's these other people, these other officials turn up who are doing different disciplines, and you might not understand their role. So we want to set it in the context of how field mixed with track, they do talk to each other occasionally, but on what circumstances would they want to talk to each other? So we're going to finish off with that. But most importantly, it's about you getting out of the session what you want to. So at the end of the session, we're going to have a panel, which we're going to talk through a couple of scenarios and examples, but it's a chance for you to ask questions. And there is a slide about asking questions, which we'll come on to. So, to start with, just who does what. So we'll have a couple of our officials coming up to talk you through their top tips and a brief insight into the world of duty sheets, if you haven't done one yet. Introducing you slowly to what you might have to do in the future as you progress through the officials pathway. How it all connects. A little bit about upgrading, and then a chance for questions and answers. But just in terms of the context, you might hear different roles mentioned that weren't mentioned on your original course. And you might think, I've heard of competition director or meeting manager. What do they do? This isn't the exclusive list of everything they do, but it's just to try and clarify that people have different roles within a competition. And if you're asked, you might know the right person to then go to and speak to. We all know that the meeting manager does expenses, that's what they're known for. But they do a little bit more than that, okay? So the athletics competition team, Rhiannon and her team, they license the competition and make sure that all the rules and regulations are in place. They set the competition standards, so they will determine and manage the entries, they'll draft the timetable and engage with us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, maybe, we don't know. They'll talk about the number of trials and heats, and they'll invite the officials to the competition. Competition director, we probably only really have these at championship level, and this is pitched at what they would do at a Welsh championship level. At a British event, there's a lot more added to that list, but there's other information that you can get on that. So they will coordinate the timetable and sign off, in this case, in conjunction with Welsh Athletics competition team. They'll agree things like routes to site, for how the athletes get from call room to the site, how officials get to site, develop and maybe approve the call room schedule, They are responsible for running the meeting to time and managing event presentations. So when we get all those athletes lining up on the long jump runway and get introduced by the announcer, it's usually the competition director that's doing that. And they should be there at the start of track and field every event, and they'll determine if an event can start early, or if it's running not to time, how can we make sure that we communicate that to the registration and other people that need to know. Meeting manager, there's a couple of people in the room who have been meeting managers in the past. They are there to oversee the officials' welfare, refreshments, expenses, kit, etc., etc., etc. And there is probably quite a few etceteras. If there's radios, they'll distribute the radios. They might be asked to distribute the field cards, depending on the competition. If there's accidents, unfortunately they happen, they will deal with that. And also, if there's a record set, they will make sure that that is signed off and documented so it can be sent off and ratified. So those are just an example of some of the bits and pieces that some of the some of the senior roles do at a competition. Okay, so just moving on, I'm going to invite Rory to come up, and he's just going to talk through some of the things that you might not have learnt on the level 1 course. Do you want to press the button? I'll press it.
Okay. Hi there. First, I'm going to talk to you today about track judging. On a level 1 course, you are given a broad outline of everything you need to know while judging and umpiring. But once you leave the course, you do not, as Sue said, there is nothing you learn until you get to level 4. There's a big gap, and you are just thrown in at the deep end and expected just to get on with it. And when you speak to some officials, you may not be quite doing it accurately. I'm going to use an example today of talking about 15 races of 1,500 metres outdoors and 1,500 metres and above indoors. With these type of races, you need a mixture of judges and umpires. Judges, so as they can pick up the result, and umpires, so as they can look for general infringements around the track, i.e. athletes stepping on the line, cutting the corners, and things like that. If we do not have umpires around the course, you will generally find that a parent has spotted it, and they are not very happy, and they'll usually come over, pull it up. So and so, my son was pushed, or my daughter was pushed. Why did no one do anything about it? And sometimes, occasionally, you have to say, unfortunately, we didn't have enough officials this day, so as we didn't have someone in that position. If more people volunteer, we would be able to have more officials and be able to cover more positions. You need to make sure when you do it, you have a chief judge and also a track referee. When infringements are reported, either they have to signal to the chief judge or track referee so as they can quickly go down and find out exactly what the problem is, and they need to radio straight away once they found the infringement to photo finish, which is the main one we deal with, so as they can either do a race clear or a race hold. If a race hold, they need to know exactly why it's being held. If you do have to disqualify an athlete, you generally have to give over a rule number explaining why the athlete is being DQ'd. If it's a younger athlete, we try, especially at the lower level events, just to give them a warning, even though some of them don't appreciate that. They think they're going to be DQ'd as soon as you call them over to chat. But especially under 11s and probably under 13s, we want to educate them rather than disqualify them. Because if we put them off at an early age, they'll probably leave the sport and won't want to compete anymore. With some of the longer races, especially indoors, you can find that the athletes come around rather quickly. We've been quite lucky at the last few races. They've been seeded, the races, so we haven't had too many problems. But very occasionally, you will find one athlete is a lot quicker than the other athletes and goes through the race and will start to lap the athletes as the race goes on. So what you need is someone on the lap board and bell keeping an eye just on the front runners, and you also need someone standing right close to them as a lap board assist. Their job is to make sure they are calling to the lap runners exactly how many laps they've got left. Some of them might, if you're unlucky and you're doing a 3,000 metres, as I found in the British Champs when I was doing one, can even be 2-3 laps behind the others, which can be a bit of a nightmare because you're trying to keep an eye on exactly how many runners are in the race and exactly where they are at all times in the race. Once the race is complete, with your lap chart, you need to sign it and put the date and what event you're doing, and preferably hand it to either the chief judge or the track referee. These are usually kept so as they can either be referred to if there's a record broken, or if there's not many judges, and as I've had once with Welsh Athletics, they rang me for the whole week, wanting to check, did every athlete run the correct number of laps? There was 2 of us did the lap chart, and both of us had exactly the same number of laps that they'd done. They didn't trust me the first time, so they rang me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday after the race, just to make sure. And by the Friday, I think they got the message. Yes, they did run the right number of laps, or someone had done a rather large PB. Well, while writing a duty sheet, indoors can vary very slightly from outdoors because of the fact that the track is only 200 metres rather than 400 metres. When writing a duty sheet, there are a couple of important things you need to remember. First thing is, you need a list of officials, usually either supplied by Welsh Athletics or, in Wales, Sue Hooper. You need to know roughly what grades they are and what experience they've got, so as you can put them, make sure that they're doing the right duties. And also you need the final timetable, which, as we found recently, is quite tricky because sometimes there's more than one version. You can sometimes have 5 or 6 versions of the same timetable, and you start doing your duty sheet and you find, nope, they've changed the timetable yet again. One of the things you need to make sure you do when you're doing your duty sheet is that you have enough judges. If you don't have enough judges, what you need to do is you need to cover the most important things on a duty sheet, and you may not be able to cover every single position that you require. And also, if you have enough judges, appoint a chief judge. They are very useful. If you are looking at an infringement somewhere else or doing something else in the track, they are your second in command. Also, which we are quite lucky in, especially in the indoor season, because one of our officials, their wife loves doing this job, track steward, manages to work the laptop, keep us informed of how many heats we've got of an event, and also put the results into the computer and send them up to photo finish. If occasionally we don't have the laptop, we have to go back to the old-fashioned way, pen and paper. With a duty sheet, especially indoors, there are a couple of key things you need to think about. Break line in 3s, 4s and 800 metre races. Lapboard and bell for races over 300 metres. Umpire around the track and make sure that you're looking for infringements. Lane judges in sprints, make sure the athletes are keeping straight, they're not getting too close to the line or elbowing anyone. And also, when you're on the judges stand, make sure you have an odd number of judges. If you have an even number, 2 could go one way, 2 could go the other way. And then you spend the next 5 minutes trying to sort out the race while the starters and everyone are getting rather anxious to start the next race. Also in sprint races, make sure you have someone on last 3. Most people are only concerned about front end of the race. Once you get past about 5 athletes, you sometimes say to the rest of them on the judge, what happened to the other ones at the back? I don't know, I only looked at the front end. That's why we always have someone on last 3. And if they preferably can, sometimes get last 4 and make sure they get last 3. Especially with some of the more senior athletes, they don't like standing at the end of the race. They get very impatient, especially if they haven't got the time they want. They just want to walk off and don't want to wait, so you can check their numbers. make sure you have a lap chart. Make sure in longer races people are writing lap charts so as you can keep an eye on where the athletes are, which ones have been lapped, and which ones you need to ring the bell for. Also have a lap board assist. Try to give judges breaks where possible. If they're just judging, as we said earlier, a long day, 8 hours, they get pretty fed up. So try to give them, if you can't give them one long break, give them 2 short breaks. Also, especially new judges, but even experienced judges need this. If you've written in your duty sheet things like symbols, like number 3, put a key at the bottom of your duty sheet to explain exactly what all these things mean. Also, try to put a track plan on there, because you might know where number 3 position is in the track, especially if they're new or inexperienced, or it's the first time they've judged indoors for a while. They can't remember where all the positions are around the track. So by putting the track plan and a key, it is extremely helpful.
Okay. Thanks very much, Rory. Okay, our timekeeping guru today is Jeff Wiggins, so if you want to come.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Let me make some input as regard the timekeeping areas. The first thing about timekeeping is it's the dark side, and people regard it as that. But it's the only area where you don't actually have to disqualify anybody. Okay? So you're there, your time, you go away again. Okay. Right. With regard to things that you might not have learned at level 1, the use of recording sheets, including lap charts. We're not obliged to make a lap chart, but it is very helpful if you do, because quite often you find that you're at odds with the track team because they've recorded differently than you have. And I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong, but if you keep your own lap chart, you're more likely to be happy with what you see. Okay? The second thing is that doesn't really happen in Wales much is the use of timekeeper's steward. They're there at the behest of the chief timekeeper, and their duties are usually decided by the chief timekeeper as to what they actually want them to do. There are certain basic duties, but it's what the chief timekeeper really wants them to do that is the important thing. Okay? The purpose and requirements of the times to announcer duty. Again, in Wales, we don't often have that duty. But quite often, if you go to a larger meeting, a UK event or a slightly bigger event, you will be given the duty of times to announcing. What you do is you go to the announcer and find out what they want you to do. Because some announcers want one thing, some announcers want another. So you've got to make sure that you do what the announcer wants you to do. Okay? The rules and excuse me. The rules and differences of the 4 by 400 meters relays, long and short stagger. Again, most races in Wales and in England generally are off a short stagger, and there's no real problem. The problem is when there's a long stagger, you have to send your timekeeping team out to cover each of the lanes, out to lane 8. So sorry, but if you're using a long stagger, which is common in international events, you might have someone who's halfway around the bend of the track and they have to get back and on to the stand to take the next athlete. Okay? So it's a rare event and you probably won't see it very often, but if it's an international event, you will see it.
What, a timekeeper walking? Sorry.
Come on.
Staggering! We said we mentioned it.
Right. Okay then. That's the difference. Dealing with records. As you all should know, or you might not know, the parameters for dealing with national records is that you actually need 3 level 4 timekeepers in order to ratify a record. Now, if there's photo finish in action, then you won't be required. But if there isn't, and the race is over 800, you might well be asked to fill in a record form, which, in the case of a national record, you need to, the timekeeper needs to inspect each of the watches that have timed the record, and those have to be recorded and signed on the record sheet. It rarely happens in Wales because usually the photo finish is fairly up and running. But you may well be faced with the eventuality of having to fill in a record form, and that's what you need to do. Okay. Timekeeping and combined events. There are separate rules for timekeeping in the combined events, and they are basically you should, according to the rule book, have 3 timekeepers on every athlete. That never happens. It's just impossible. But obviously with combined events, you need to try and find as many covers as you can for each athlete. In the event of the photo finish failing on one of the heats of a combined event, then all of that particular event has then to be hand timed, and the times are assimilated from the hand timetables from the combined events. If in the event of one of the heats working with photo finish, the photo finish time can be used as a personal record, but not as the result of the event. So any photo finish time can be used individually, but not. Okay. And there should be a maximum, or not a maximum, but generally a minimum of 5 athletes in each heat, and certainly no less than 3. Okay? Use of ticks and crosses when recording multiple times. I was asked this by one of the timekeepers who are present in this room. This is usually a procedure that's used by photo finish for getting an accurate result. But if you're multi-timing, it is often quite a good idea because some people run through and then stop, some people stop before the line and then run through, and you don't actually know who's finished and who hasn't. And if they've finished, you can tick them, and if they're going on, you can cross them. It's particularly important for multi-timers because if you don't do that, sometimes you can get out of sequence and give a wrong result. Okay, thank you. Duty sheet. I'll go through it very quickly. Keeping things simple, easy to read and understand, clear and concise, but not too fussy. Ensure that all the necessary duties are covered. You have to have the knowledge of your team, strengths and weaknesses when allocating duties. because it is quite important that you sort out your team so that really, other than the requirements for first place, you should have your strength in the middle of the team, because that's where the action is, and that's where you're most likely to, if you put a novice timekeeper, they're most likely to crumble, or they're most likely to get something wrong. So that's, and you have to have knowledge, and obviously if you don't know someone, you need to find out about them, if you can. The next one is avoid overloading specific officials with too many duties, equality. I've been to meetings where I've been given every lap split, lap chart, every duty you can possibly think of, really. But there's no need for that. If you spread it out evenly across the team, you have a happy team and a team that are actually engaged and working. And finally, the maintenance of lines of communication. Obviously, the timekeepers communicate with the track judges to see if they're ready for a start of the race. They communicate with the photo finished when they send out their results, if they are required. And they obviously communicate with the starter, because unless they do that, they ain't going to start and watch. Okay? Thank you very much.
Last question, sorry, I forgot to click on, but quite often it's about reviewing. So, did it work?
Yes.
How can I do it better next time? So always think about that reflection at the end of a session. Okay, we're going to have Team Hooper up next. To you, to me, to you, is it?
No, it's me. I'm proud.
We normally follow us
She's
about
my
follow him today.
Oh no, you go with I think.
No, go on, Sue, you'll mess it up.
Yeah, all right, yeah. All right. Yes, it's still morning. We've got lunch coming up, so it'll be as quickly as possible. As usual, you get a bog off with us. So I'll go into exactly what we get up to. So the level 1 course is really, really good in sort of providing you the basics. You know, this is a gun, this is how you load it, this is how you fire it. This is where you might want to stand if you're starting, but didn't really go into where we need to stand as a starter's assistant. And as you come up through the grades as starter's assistant, you've got to be in full sight of the starter, and he wants to know those messages. You're sending back visual messages, but you've got to be invisible to everybody else. And it's something that you don't pick up right at the beginning. You're not shown where to start. You're not, if you actually ever look at where a starter assistant who knows their job, very, very little movement, very much out of sight, and very, very focused with the starter in providing the right signals at the right time. So you're not really taught that. You build our experience, and really with talking to other sort of higher level starter assistants. Extra bits. As a starter assistant, it's great. The athletes are going to turn up on their line, they're ready to start. No, they're not. Their numbers are in the wrong place, they haven't got pins. Oh, they've got spikes missing from their shoes, one undone. If you're ever there with Sue, I don't know, she brings everything in a massive box, but no, you've got to have little bits and pieces on you to start that race. Even as a starter, you get there and you've seen the old transducer go up, and the wind is blowing, and you're there with the gun, and next thing you know, it's going away. So you have little bits and pieces in your bag, probably same as field, just to make that life a little bit easier and tying things down, etc. So you know, you don't cover that in courses. You pick that up through experience. Level 1, don't discuss any of the electronic equipment that we use nowadays. As I said, the main thing it discusses was guns in terms of equipment. So we've got tests out now. Most of you see the electronic starting equipment, and if you've ever seen the version we've got in Wales, there's multiple boxes to set up, and it's a little bit complicated, especially for the older members of us. So I've actually put a little video together, so anybody can go in and go bang. And I think it's really good that if we've got any type of equipment like that, just to have that little video, because people don't like reading through instructions. It helps. SIS is that something else you won't pick up until level 4 in real terms. And again, we use it in the Welsh Championships. Lucky we got people like Ian who comes down and operates those for us. But the interpretation, the use of SIS, you don't pick up that. Great. Everyone's a starter. Everybody knows when it's a false start. Great. The rules are there. Yes. Yeah, there's the rules. Yeah, where your hands and feet come off the ground before the recoil gun is a false start. Yeah, but wait a minute, I've got 8 athletes lined up here, and you've got 8 individuals all trying to start a race, and you're trying to get a fair start. And it takes experience to understand when you see a false start and not a false start. When do you interpret, how you interpret the rules? Does someone get a conduct warning? Do you give a disqualification? Who triggered who? Yeah, because the person who actually might have used everybody sees movement is not the person who set that off. So, yeah, you're in red. Everybody knows who's made that decision, and everybody can come down and have a chat with you. But it's that confidence and that background experience that will allow you to decide when you see a false start. You have got a team around you, and hopefully you've normally got a team around you at championships, etc. But a lot of the times now, because of the number of starters, you're on your own. You've got to make that decision in a split second. General awareness and courtesy of other events. Sue's just picked me up before the meeting that of something I've done wrong previously.
Sue Alby.
Sue Alby, yeah, so she cornered me. But you're up there, and obviously with the guns, you've got quite a loud rapport for the guns. So you need to be aware of what's happening around, especially close to you, usually around the hammer cages and stuff like that. About when you're starting, you're keeping an observation. I mean, I had occasion at Bucks where I got my knuckles wrapped because I did blow the whistle or I fired the gun at the wrong time. But I had a hammer cage and I had 2 high jump beds. So they weren't actually listening to me, but I was wrong when I fired the gun. So it needs to be both ways. That communication needs to be both ways when we do this. It's very, very easy on the indoors with a pole vault because they're falling in front of me so I can see them. And general responsibility for equipment. It's the day you're at the track and someone says there's a bad set of blocks and you think, well, oh yeah, it's starter's responsibility for blocks. People wouldn't think of that. Or suddenly you come to a relay meeting. Oh yeah, it's starter's responsibility to have the buttons on the track. Not really told that. That's not in the rule books. So it's things like that don't actually get looked at. And communication. I think communication would be good for the meeting. Is everything. You need to at least come up and have a chat with the timekeeper and complain what colour board they're going to put up, because white board against a white background is not a very good situation to be in. SAs having a chat with the track judges on echelon starts, etc. for 800s, and various communications. And I think we do that pretty well in Wales. I think we have in our stovepipe. We're happy to talk to each other and make things run smoothly. Start duty sheets. Yeah, I feel they're going to be very jealous when they see our start duty sheets because they're very, very basic. The essay is a little bit more complicated, got a little bit more thought on what they're doing, but in true sense, I mean, I've got 2 recall guys and that's all I've got to do is manage it. So most of the time, other than championships, we just talk to each other on it and who's starting the next race, so things is quite easy. There's no set templates. We don't go into level 1 meeting and say here's a template. Every meeting you go to where there's a new chief, there's a different template. As you get up through the levels, you hone down into the best templates. Even though they're simple, we'll sit down prior to the event, after our meeting, and we'll quickly run through that any nuances that we've got in our start sheets people don't understand. And that's easy enough. Unwritten rules as well. When you create your first start sheet and someone's there observing and say, well, no, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, and you're thinking, well, where's that written down? Typically start code, we're always supposed to start the first race, not written down anywhere. You always end the last race. You should always take the senior men's hundreds or 60s as a lead, etc. So there's these little rules, and you until you get a little bit of problems, then you haven't covered that unwritten rule. You don't actually pick that up. And as I said earlier, as you progress through the grades or work with people and peers, you pick up all these little things, and Sue and I probably try and bring this back into the people we're learning, because we haven't got a really big peer group within in our environment to bring these sort of unwritten rules back in, and that's where we try to work. Is there anything else? So there's a starter's start sheet, very, very simple. You're either the starter or you recall 1 or 2, and if you recall 1, that's your number 2, he sits standing next to you and take care of the inside echelon. Recall 2 is usually the person who's looking at the back of the blocks or taking the outside of an echelon. So it's very, very simple. So it only takes us a while to knock out. And this is one of the better examples of an essay sheet, and these vary depending on who's the chief's CSA. And again, duty 1, duty 2, duty 3. Duty 1 being the lead for the line, etc., and managing the athletes. Duty 2 might be doing the run-outs and just assisting. And duty 3 is usually off on a little chat walk up to pick up some athletes from the call room. So nothing difficult in that. But I think that's it, isn't it?
That's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and next up, Becky Gibbs, talking about the field.
It is still morning, thankfully. So I was just going to talk about some things that we didn't learn on the level 1 course. So it's kind of titled this, What the Flag? What are we doing with the flag? So obviously you've got your 3 flags, you've got white, yellow and red, and kind of what do we do with them? And one of the main things that does get picked up at a bigger level meeting especially is how you hold a flag, and you wouldn't believe there were so many different ways to hold a flag. But the correct way to hold a flag is at 45-degree angle and to hold it for 5 seconds. So very often you'll see flags be kind of whipped up in the air and back down, and that doesn't really give a lot of time for other people who might need to know the kind of outcome of a trial. Especially if you've got announcers, they're sort of saying, oh, was that a white flag? Was it a red flag? I don't know, because it's sort of been whipped back and forth before anyone can see. So it's to hold it at a 45-degree angle for about 5 seconds, just so that everyone can really see what's going on. So whether that's, whichever flag that is really, to be held like that. Something that's really important that can be quite often lost is the white and red flag on horizontal jumps. So if you're on a long jump or a triple jump, you shouldn't really be putting your white flag up that the trial is valid until the athlete has left the pit. Because part of the valid trial is that they've left the pit correctly, and some athletes, especially senior athletes, won't be very happy with their jump and will want to make it an invalid trial by walking back through the pit. So it's not holding your white flag up or red flag until they've left the pit. And equally on a triple jump, one of your pit judges will be looking for the correct foot sequence to make sure someone hasn't snuck in a sneaky extra hop or step or jump. So again, you can't put your white flag up to say it's a valid trial until your pit judge has kind of indicated to you with maybe a thumbs up or just a thumbs down if it's bad, to kind of decide whether it's valid or not. Yellow flags are quite often used to control the runway. There's a couple of uses for yellow flags, but one of them is to control the runway, and especially indoors we have, depending on the timetable, you can have a pole vault, a long or a triple jump, maybe 2 high jumps, all happening in a very small area where you have athletes trying to prepare for their high jump and run down the runway for a pole vault and then coming the other way for their long or triple. So very often you'll see someone with a yellow flag, and sometimes we give that to a volunteer, but actually it needs to be somebody who's more experienced, because they need to be aware of who's running where, who's trying to take precedence for their next jump, and kind of making it fair to everybody. So you don't have all the pole vaulters going and nobody's allowed to high jump until they've all been. So it's kind of keeping that control of the runway, and very often that's when they will be holding the flag out to the side rather than at their 45-degree angle. And the other use of a yellow flag is when we have clocks on an event. Every athlete gets a minute per trial for their first trial, and the time can change depending on number of athletes left, or the number of if they're doing consecutive trials. But in every event, when there's 15 seconds left on the clock, the person who is in charge of the clock will hold their yellow flag up, and they will keep it raised until the clock runs out. And this is really to signal to the lead on the event that this person is getting close to the end of their time, and could potentially be looking at a time infringement and making it an invalid trial if they haven't started their event before the end of their time. So another thing is when we have long throws, or any throws from circle, and long jump and takeoff boards, long jump and triple jump takeoff boards, is to try and keep away from those areas, so trying not to step into the circle, which can be quite hard if you've got a really small cone and a really big circle, and short arms like me, you sometimes do need to get really close to the edge, but it just avoids bringing dirt and debris into the circle, because the athletes really don't like it. You often see them with their cloths or getting a brush to sweep the circle to get rid of all the kind of debris you've brought in, especially if we're on a wet, windy, muddy day. You don't want mud and grass being brought into the circle. And the same with the takeoff boards. You need to be able to see in your plasticine like a nice clear mark, and if it's full of grass or full of sand, that's going to make your job harder, really. Oh, there we go. Another job is tape pull through, and I remember having a conversation when I started about what am I pulling through? What does that mean? What am I pulling, and where is it going through, and how do I do it? And one of the things when you are pulling through, you're measuring from the spike to the 0 point, either on the takeoff board or on the edge of the circle. And if you're the person with the tape, it needs to be either parallel to the line or through the centre of the circle. You can't just put it in any direction, because that ensures that everybody is measured fairly. And if you are on the end of the tape, don't pull it, don't yank it and pull the person on the other end over, because that's just bad manners, really. And read from standing up. You don't need to crouch down. Hopefully you don't need to crouch down. Hopefully you'll be able to see the tape from standing up. And again, that's another thing of not getting too close to the board or the circle and bringing more rubbish in. Arm action is a wonderful duty on the shot, and it can take quite a long time to figure out what you're really looking for. So it's all about the athlete keeping the shot close into their neck, and one of the main things is that their elbow doesn't drop when it comes a bit of a netball throw. It's it has to be a put, not a throw. So it's really useful to use warm-up to practice, to kind of get your eye in and see, is there anybody that is not looking great with their technique, that they might become, might have an invalid trial. And obviously with the younger athletes, as Rory said earlier, it's giving them a general warning at this, after you've watched them practice, it might be a bit dodgy. So, saying to them, right, we're going to start now, just a reminder to everyone, you need to keep the shot in at the neck, because otherwise it could be an invalid trial. And not kind of signalling to one person in particular, because that could be assistance. And not being afraid to move for left-handed throwers. You don't have to be rooted to one spot. You might need to move to the other side of the circle just to really see a left-handed thrower's putt. So, as Rob mentioned, our duty sheets are slightly more complicated than a starter's duty sheet because there are just so many more people involved. So one of the first things that I do, and I know that many other the higher level officials do when creating a duty sheet, is a Gantt chart for which events are happening when and how many people are you actually going to need. So you can kind of see here, we've got the warm-up in the kind of peach colour, and then the competitions are colour-coded. And it's really sad, but there's a system. So the yellow ones are the sand ones, the blue ones are the ones that have a blue bed to jump on, and the shot is red. You don't have to use that, that's just in my head that works, and I know where I am. And then obviously when you have an outdoor duty sheet, the long throws are green because they're on the grass, so it's really hard, a system. So here you can see how many officials you need at different times of the day, and there are easier ways to do this. This is from a spreadsheet that Chris has put together, which I'm sure if you're creating your duty sheet for the first time, he'd be happy to share with you. But any kind of spreadsheet software, or even just scribbled on a bit of paper, you can kind of work out how long things are going to be. And this enables you to say, well, actually, in the middle of the day, I need 19 officials. I've only got 14 on my list. I need to make sure I've got more volunteers, or I need to ask people to come along. Or it's where you could say, could I move this event later in the day because that'll free up some people. So that's really useful before you've even thought about writing a duty sheet, just knowing who you need and where and when. And then the next thing I do from there is look at each person and where they're going to be. So you can map out each person's day. So you can see at the top, I've got Jane there. I know she's going to be on the senior men triple jump, followed by the shot, and then the long jump for the senior women. And if at some point of the day it all goes a bit wrong, I can look at this and think, oh, well, Jane's got a gap between 2:30 and 3:30. Is there something she can do? Could she help out on a warm-up? Could she just swap with somebody else who's been held up on maybe a pole vault that's gone on a bit longer than we expected? So that's quite useful as well. And these are just extra bits that just, you don't have to do them, but it's really helpful. And when you're looking at this, it's kind of thinking about your timings for events. So we always allocate 30 minutes for most event warm-ups, 40 minutes to 45 minutes for a high jump, and 60 minutes for a pole vault. And they're really standard across any event you do. You can sometimes get away with a bit less if you know you've only got 4 athletes competing, but we never increase the warm-up time. And then you can kind of work on 1 minute per athlete per trial as a rough estimate of how long the event's going to take. And the other thing that we like to do is to check that the officials have a range of duties. If you've turned up and you've raked a long jump, and then you rake in a triple jump, and then you're retrieving the shot, that's a really physical day for somebody. So it's trying to give people a mixture of different duties across different events, and sometimes the timetable doesn't allow, and you do end up on long jump and triple jump and then another long jump. So even then it's especially important to mix it up between those events. And as Jeff said earlier, in timekeeping, it's trying to spread the duties out. Well, it doesn't always work on the field. If you're the lead, you might have 5 or 6 different things to do because that's the position you're in. So you can't always spread those out to give everyone a fair number of specific things to do. It doesn't work because of where you have to be. So we've included, Sue's got a sheet of top tips for putting together a duty sheet, and I'm not going to read through them all, but it's just, the one that gets me is when you're on a vertical jump and I'm there with someone like Nick Hickman, who is incredibly tall, and that's really hard for us to work together because we're not anywhere near the same height. So it's looking at, what do you know about the officials? Are they both really tall people? Are they both really short people? You might not want 2 really short people on a senior men's high jump because we might not actually be able to reach the heights that they're jumping over our heads. It's trying to mix up, to have mixed gender teams, not all female or all male teams, and potentially not all male teams on female events and not all female teams on male events. Sometimes it's useful to think about what are the capabilities of your officials. If you know that an official has bad back and can't stand still for long periods of time, it's given them a duty which enables them to move around a bit more. Or if you know, in the reverse, have somebody who can't move around too much, giving them a more static duty. So again, it's really knowing the team, and if you don't know the team, trying to find out from somebody who does know. If you've got someone coming in from out of area, or someone you've never heard of before, figuring out what can they do, is there anything you need to know about them. And the one other thing is, if you've got people who are travelling in from really far away, we try not to put them on the last event of the day, because they've just got so much further to travel to get home. And you know, if it does go on, if it's a long event, it's just polite to not do that. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so thank you very much. So there's another sheet and a half of this, so we're going to send this to Zoe, and hopefully it can be added to some ongoing resources that we're developing. So we're just going to have, I think we're running a little over time, but we've got a developing panel over the other side of the room, Becky, soon. And we're just going to sort of just talk about, we've talked about each individual discipline, but we've also talked about how they work together, and we've touched on that a little bit. So I just want to fire a couple of questions. I think Zoe's just going to move around.